Afternoon, everybody. Now, I am Mahendrawati. I am from Institut Teknologi 10 November Surabaya in Indonesia. I think I have something that I feel very important for us as the BPM community to tackle. So, my presentation today is about how can we develop inclusive business process management. I will divide my talk as follows. First, I will discuss in more detail about the background of my talk or my paper, and then I will use some information from previous work, related work on inclusiveness, and then I will start defining inclusive BPM before I finish off with proposal for how we can develop inclusive business process management as future research. Okay, so I think we all know and agree that diversity and inclusion is part of the Sustainable Development Goals, and it is the tenet of all SDGs. But it is more related, but it is directly related to SDGs number 5 regarding gender equality, and also SDG number 10, that is reduce inequalities. And at the same time, we as a community on business process management has tried to tackle many contemporary issues, including innovation, diversity, and inclusion. So Recker and Mendling in 2016, in their literature review of papers published in Business Process Management Conference, said that many papers highlight ways in which BPM research could be more diverse, inclusive, or innovative. And in more recent, we also have learn about the movement called process science. So process science try to focus on processes, and it is a scientific investigation of these processes. And most importantly, that it is try to be interdisciplinary and with the intention to influence and change processes to create an impact. So while that were clearly there is a strong push for inclusivity, it hasn't received enough attention in the BPM discipline. So I put on this personal picture of me trying to have a look at myself in the mirror in one of the bathroom in the Netherlands. And as you can see, I need more than just, I need a little help. So based on that, in one way, we have this movement toward inclusivity. And as one of the reviewer of my paper said, it is very hard to avoid or to argue otherwise. But at least at the time when I wrote the paper, I didn't see many works that directly tackle this issue. So this creates two research questions for me. So what does inclusivity mean for BPM? And how can the BPM discipline contribute to the attainment of inclusivity? Then I try to conduct a quick literature review. I use the word inclusive process or business process and management. It didn't turn up with any paper related to business processes, and instead I found inclusive business models and inclusive business and inclusive education. But I can learn from this related work. So inclusive business model engage income constraint groups in the value chain to addressing neglected problems. And inclusive businesses is any self-sustaining entity that adopts this business model. And then there's also a definition by Magnus in 2023 that inclusive business model is actually a strategy involving people at the base of the economic pyramid by integrating them into the company or corporate value chain. And Finally, inclusive education emphasized that inclusivity means guarantees access for all, including people with disabilities, and eliminate discrimination. So from here, I learned that the definition refers to the target of inclusivity as the poor, income constrained groups or people at the base of the economic pyramid and people with disability. Then I have to make a disclaimer. The paper accepted, then I learned that the BPM S2 earlier today in the workshop has actually several papers that, although didn't mention about inclusivity, but target some aspect. Try to then define what I mean by inclusive BPM. First, inclusivity means intentionally and thoughtfully design and focusing on people and human rights, addressing the needs of the poor and most vulnerable groups. So I think inclusive BPM is a discipline of managing work processes that must be intentionally inclusive, thoughtfully designed and implemented with people and human rights at the center of all aspects. I know that this sounds very, very big and ambitious, but I can divide this into internally inclusive and externally inclusive, also relate it into different level of stakeholders. It can be individuals, organizations, or value chains or countries. Now, inclusive BPM, I don't think it's so far from the BPM actually. It's related to the context aware BPM because it provides an additional goal to consider in BPM adoption will because which will influence the BPM plan action. Also, it relates to what Michael is already proposing, that's called benevolent BPM, as both focus on aligning BPM initiatives with the well-being of all stakeholders, including employees, customers, and society. What I mean by inclusive BPM here adds extra considerations of income constrained group, women, and people with disabilities. Now, this is how I try to conceptualize inclusive BPM. When I mention that it can be internally or externally inclusive, I mean that if we talk about the people or individual within organizations that is part of the business processes, then this individual can then we are tackling inclusivity to include the marginal group, women and disabled people within the business processes. Then, if we go further into organization, well, organization can have a low income, can be low income and has low maturity and unskilled. So I think this is the target of organizational level BPM in inclusive BPM. Then, if we then expand this overview to include the value chain, then we then think about the organizations with low income also that acts as the customers or clients, employees, suppliers, and producer of an organization. So it is external, but we still need to consider this inclusivity aspect. Finally, when we talk about at the national or country level, we all know the divide between the global south and the global north. At the moment, most of the BPM related concept, methods, and techniques are developed in the global north. Not many aspects of the global south has been addressed in the literature today. So then, how do we develop inclusive BPM? I actually conducted a design research. I use my thought process is try to design how can we implement that conceptualization into reality. I divide it into mainstream and targeted approach. Mainstream approach is basically conducting BPM as it is now, but we deliberately considered aspects of inclusivity. Whereas a targeted approach is that we try to tackle directly and contribute directly uh, uh, in realizing inclusivity in our world. Then I tried to map it down into the business process management life cycle by Dumas et al. So it can be at the identification of business process. I add modeling because I think it's the big part of the BPM, and then analyze, redesign, implement, and monitor. So, for example, in the identification stage, if we are going to tackle using a mainstream approach, then we can try to identify barriers and challenges to inclusivity in an organization's business processes. Whereas if we go and do a more targeted research, we can try identify a set of processes specifically for inclusivity target group. For example, creating process for people with disability. In modeling, for example, a mainstream approach can be to identify how the current way of modeling business processes may challenge certain stakeholders. And I'm very happy that earlier today in the workshop, we see that there's a paper tackling modeling for visually impaired or blind people. Now, I cannot go into detail for each of these, but now I can try to give you an examples from my home country, Indonesia. So, for example, at individual level, there is a problem in Indonesia where we have a target group called Warung. This is a small family-owned business. Uh, typical Typically found in Indonesia. It can take many forms, but basically it is owned by normally a family or an individual, but they open it in their home terrace or anything that doesn't require a rent cost. Now, modern retail disrupt the existence of these conventional warungs, and there are many startups that already pay attention on how to digitally transfer warung owner. However, the warung owners find it even just using a mobile application as shown in this picture here, they are facing a lot of difficulties because most of them are not technologically savvy. So the inclusivity problem here, how can we simplify processes for such individuals with low technical skills? So not just in terms of UI and UX, user interface or user experience, but more about how to simplify the steps and the processes. Then, secondly, this is from our recent work on business process maturity level. We realized that there are many organizations has low process maturity and constrained by their own human resources. Therefore, these organizations that are mostly small and medium enterprise tend to be reluctant to try to adopt BPM, and instead they try a low-cost solution of technology such as open source software without really paying attention on their processes. So the inclusivity question here is how can BPM providers sensitize their offering to include the needs of such organizations? Then finally, at the national level, so in Indonesia, we have these 5 guiding principles that basically align very much with the aspects of BPM. We believe in unity and then democracy and also social justice. And also, we have many cultural values such as tolong menolong, help each other, gotong royong, help each other is usually carried out between community members for individual needs, such as construction houses. But we also have gotong royong, where working together, that is for cleaning up the public area, building houses. So these cultural values are very much aligned with BPM. However, at the same time, we also realize that many organizations in Indonesia face difficulty in breaking the functional silos. So there is a paradox here, and it brings us to the question of inclusive BPM. Why does the national culture that aligns with BPM not transpire at the organizational level? And how can we address this issue? So then, with that, I will conclude. I will finish off this presentation by reiterating again that my talk is not the end, certainly. It's just it mainly aims to trigger the BPM community to think about developing a more inclusive BPM. And in doing so, I propose a definition and also pointed out areas for further studies. And now I very much looking forward to hear your thoughts and comments. Thank you very much.